scripting too.
Oh, thank you very much. There we go. Okay, so welcome everybody to Surfs Up, using futures thinking to build relationships in all learning environments. I'm Andrew Hickman. I'm Director of Educational Technology at Capital Region ESD over in Tumwater, Washington. I also am a co-lead for the state work. And so we are doing a lot of this. And my colleague Joel is with me today. So Joel.
Hi, I'm Joel LeBel, he, him pronouns, and I'm a professional learning coach in educational technology at Capital Region ESD 113 as well. And we're really excited that you're joining the statewide effort of the AEST. I think we can get started. So in our time today, you're going to learn how to surf. In a sense, I promise that the surfing metaphor will make more sense by the time we're finished. You will better understand the value and utility of futures thinking. You will stretch your imagination to consider alternative futures. You will see where your image of the future stands in relationship to other educators and roles. You will create actionable pathways to leverage your role as a relationship builder. And you'll also learn how to use a digital tool that may be new to you to increase remote engagement. Okay. To begin with, I'll start by elaborating what we mean by futures thinking. So futures studies is a process of creatively applying our background assumptions, hard data, values, ethical principles, and overall theory of preferred change and stability to different images of the future. Futures thinking is not about making guesses or predictions, but instead seeks the invention of many alternative futures and calls these images of the future. Futures thinking studies alternative images of the future and comes up with ways to research and dialogue about them. And futures thinking is plural because we do not believe that there is just one possible future. There are many possible futures. And lastly, futures thinking will help us understand, plan for, and move toward futures that we prefer. Okay, next slide. Going to start the video. So the next thing we're going to do is ask for your engagement in the chat, and we're going to do a chat storm. A chat storm is when everyone presses send at the same time. So we're going to sync ourselves up. So first I'll give you a prompt, and then I'll give you a minute or two to type into the chat without hitting send. And then on my call, I'll count it down. We'll all press send at the same time. So the chat prompt is, in the chat, write a quick definition or your first thoughts that come up for this word. And we are purposefully not pronouncing the word, so you can be creative with how you interpret it. So I'll give everyone about 90 seconds or so to open up the chat box, type in your answer, but don't press send yet. I'll give just another few seconds for people to think it out or type it out. Okay, so hopefully everyone's ready with their finger near the return or the send button, and we'll count it down to do the chat storm. We'll do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it was quite the storm because everyone's being very engaged right now, which is great. So look over the replies for a second. And as you look through things, think about the many different meanings of this word, particularly that we can pronounce this word in two different ways. If we pronounce it in one way, it can be a verb, meaning to plan, to figure, to estimate for the future, right? To project. But it can also have a noun meaning, right? To mean a specific plan or a design, something like a project. And there's just a slight subtle way we pronounce those different things, but in this activity, we want you to draw on both meanings. and all of the other meanings and interpretations you see in the chat as well. This can help us connect our projected images of relationship building in the future to the real world projects that will align with your professional development goal.
So I'm going to ask them to look through the chat storm for about 30 seconds and find the different ways that people talked about it. Are you seeing the two different meanings that Joel just mentioned? And if you do, go ahead and reply yes in the chat. I'm actually seeing a couple more possibly.
I agree.
Thank you. Okay, Joel, keep them going.
Okay, so next slide. So before we start the activity itself, we're going to sort of flip things around and provide reflection questions at the start. We're not planning on getting into a robust discussion on this yet, and we hope you can maybe take just one of these away with you today to reflect on as you make your next steps as a futures thinker. I'll read through the questions, and then I'll give you a few minutes to take some notes, jot down some ideas, make some bullet points, any connection points you see, and then maybe revisit those at the end of the session. The first question is, why use futures thinking to approach relationships? Why use futures thinking to approach career development? Knowing how we currently foster relationship and career development, what are some implications for the future of your role? What are some implications for the future of students? Knowing how we currently foster relationship and career development, what are some implications for the future of your professional goals? And what are some implications on the future of students' goals in their learning? We can move, or actually we're going to give a few minutes here. So I'll just set a timer. We'll just have a few note-taking minutes, maybe picking one of the questions out or jotting down some thoughts you have. This can be for yourself or to kind of kickstart conversations down the road.
And we have been putting the slide deck in the chat, so you'll have access to these in the future as well, just so you know.
It's been a minute. We'll give you another minute.
Thank you, William. I love that question. How does futures thinking relate to building capacity for others, including students? I think we could add that to this list pretty easily.
Yeah, definitely. My first inclination was to jump and to try to answer it, but I realized really quickly it's from my role and my background, and it's really exciting that we have so many other folks in the room to be able to offer that. And hopefully we can explain futures thinking a little bit over the next couple slides as we do an activity with this, so that you might be able to answer that question a little bit by the end as well. Okay, my timer's wrapping up here. We can start our activity. So we're calling this activity Futures Thinking Quadrant, but it's also been known, and I've applied it in classroom settings under the name Where Do You Stand? And there's a link, or sorry, there's a source and article about it that's on the slide deck on the next slide. On this slide, though, I'm going to explain some of these terms a little bit more later, but the main things you're going to be doing in this activity are you're going to rank your optimism or pessimism under two different variables. We're going to call these variables essence and influence, and I'll explain what I mean by these. And then we're going to use a digital tool to map the coordinates of your position on a quadrant, taking these two variables into a quadrant format. And then we're going to discuss your responses and what you saw from others to certain question prompts in breakout rooms. So that's what we're going to be doing over the next 25 minutes or so.
And I do want to just highlight that this activity we have created purely digital, but using this futures thinking quadrant idea, you could do it with physical representations in your classroom if you go back to in-person teaching. So this works physical, hybrid, as well as remotely.
We used to do this as an option in my class, where if it was what students wanted to do that day, we went outside and we would do the futures thinking quadrant out in the grass to be able to get some fresh air. And it's a really fun way to physically see the space or clumping of different people or different preferences. Next slide. So you're going to be asked to rank your optimism and pessimisms about the now times and also about the future. So a lot of people ask, what context should I base this on? And the important thing about this activity is you should think of a context that best represents your understanding of the world. The point is to place where your spot is on this quadrant. And it's also supposed to be kind of fun. It's not like you have to self-analyze to the point where you can't make a decision. We don't want you to be that burdened by this. And so when we think about optimism and pessimism, we're just simply thinking, how do you feel about your own image of now times or the future? And then there's these terms essence and influence, and these will be different parts of the quadrant. Essence is what is or will be the case. This is the unchangeable stuff. You might call this the environment in the very abstract or broad sense of that term. These are stable trends that you think will either continue or will take over. Influence, it can also be thought of as something like what ought to be the case or what we can do about it or not. So this is the possibility, one end of the spectrum or not, about human intervention. Can we do anything or will we do anything about how things are going? I think we can go to the next slide.
Let's pause there and see if anybody has any questions first. If you have a question on any of these terms before we get to the activity, feel free to either unmute or type them in the chat. I'm going to give a minute to make sure that these definitions are clear because they'll help in your activity.
Will they have the definition in our activities so we can refer to them?
I can throw it in the slide deck once I'm, yes, I can try to do that right before the breakout session.
I'm noticing William took a picture. Thank you, William. I do the same all the time. Okay, so we're going to shift to the next slide and get ready for the activity. So here's what we're going to do. You did an activity similar to this when you first got into the main breakout Zoom. This is using a tool called Poll EV, Poll Everywhere, and this is their quadrant mapping. Well, it's image clicking is really what it is. We created the quadrant. So we're going to give you a link that you'll go to. I'll post that in the chat soon. And then you're going to place yourself where you feel you are based on your role, where you stand as an educator, your role as an educator. And Joel, did you have any more information with this before we begin?
Yeah, sure. So you're going to be asked to put your position on this map that represents your context and understanding of the world and if we can do anything about it. You're going to be asked about influence, which again is what we can do to intervene, and essence, which is how things are going to go or are going. So at the top of this quadrant, and you think you can go to the next slide where it shows it large. At the top of this quadrant, and I'm not saying an average person, I'm just kind of going to give one narrative that might explain what someone who's at the extreme top might be thinking. They're going to get a sense of the world of something like this. While things go wrong from time to time, the overall trend is progress and things are getting better. That's the top. At the bottom, it's something like, while things go okay from time to time, the overall trend is struggle and things are not getting better, they're getting worse, if you're at an extreme bottom end of this. At the right end of the map, the driving cause of our experience in the world is people and human intervention. So while there are big processes and forces that shape the world, by far the biggest cause of the way that I experience it or the way that things go is people. And at the left end, you might say something like, well, people are influential here and there. It's really the larger forces, political, physical, spiritual, that have caused the world to be the way that it is now as I experience it. And we're going to be asking you to combine your ranking of optimism and pessimism about essence, how things are going, and what people can do about it. And that might put you on one far end, it might put you right in the middle, it might put you on a variety of places on the quadrant.
So just to rephrase and help a little bit, you're going to get access to this quadrant and place a pin where you feel you are. So you're either going to say, for my essence, I'm feeling optimistic about the way things are going, or I'm feeling pessimistic about the way things are going. And then influence are, if I'm optimistic, that means I feel we can change things moving forward. If I'm pessimistic, it means that we don't have much say in how we change things. And we're taking this from the stand of educators. So as an educator, looking at the world today, how are you feeling? Where would you place yourself? And this is about your role. We have people in this room that are paraeducators, we have administrators, we have technology TOSAs, we have teachers, we have office staff, we have district staff. So depending on your role and your experiences, you are going to put yourself where you feel you belong. Nobody else can say where you belong. Okay. Are we ready? And you may use any device. So you could either use, oh, I'll go back to the definition. Unless Joel just pasted it.
I just pasted a link to a small slide deck that you can use in the breakout rooms that just has the prompts for the breakout rooms. And I just copied the slide with the definitions of essence and influence as well into that slide deck for people need to reference.
So the activity is now open. I'm going to paste the link to reply. So all you need to do is click the link or type the link in on your phone. You can see it at the top of the screen or in the chat. And then you can place your pin where you feel. There we go. We got somebody. And if you choose to move your pin, you can do that. We'll give about 2 minutes to place your pin. So this is where educators stand today.
Andrew, for some reason, it shows up black on the link that I went to on my PC. So I'm going to try my phone. So I may be a little bit longer here.
No, no problem. We can wait. And we will be taking a quick screenshot of these as well, so you can have them for your information for the breakouts.
Will you give the definitions again in the chat or the screen,
Sure.
just to make sure that I'm understanding it?
Mm-hmm. So right now we're something kind of nice to see, which is we hear how hard it is all the time, and we hear all these horror stories and this doom and gloom. But right now, people in the room are feeling, for the most part, optimistic.
I'm excited to hear what happens in the breakout. So Joel, do you want to grab a quick snapshot of this before
Yes.
I move on to the next prompt? Because we're going to do this again. We're doing this a total of 4 times. Same link. So you're going to go to the same link again in a minute.
Okay.
You got it?
Mhm.
Okay. Now we're on to the next prompt. Here we go. So this was where educators stand today. Let's do the next one. Hopefully it lets me actually move on, because sometimes this does not. Okay, next one is up. Now we're thinking about where students stand today. So put yourself in the mind of a student. How are they feeling about essence versus influence? Are they optimistic? Are they pessimistic? Where would your students be if you did an overall summary of them? If you have kids, think about your kids. Where would your kids feel the world today in regards to education? So where do students stand?
And again, just to help everyone out, lower end or the left end is going to be pessimistic. And going higher on the graph or to the right is going to represent optimism in one of the categories. All right, I'm going to fill mine out too.
If anybody needs the link again, please let me know. I'll put it back in the chat.
When we put our spot, can we just close out of the, that thing, whatever it is, that poly, whatever it is?
You can.
Pull the poll, okay, thank you.
Okay, about 30 more seconds, Joel, and we'll take a screenshot of this one. I always like to, as an educator, think about if I was to do this in a room of students using this kind of activity and their thoughts, what would they say? Okay, Joel, let's screenshot.
There. Okay.
Okay, I'm locking responses. Okay. So now you've picked your positions. In the chat, I want you to think about the position that you put yourself. So either influence or essence, pessimistic or optimistic. Think about your location in that quadrant, where we just had you, where you put yourself. In the chat, write why you put yourself there. And be brutally honest. There's no reason not to be. We're in a room of peers and we all know the situation. What are you thinking? And Joel put the pictures in for us if you need a refresher. We gave an example. I am higher on essence because, but I am closer to the center of influence because. So give us your reason in the chat. Why did you put your spot where you put your spot? And you can do either for students or for yourself. You can choose which one you put. Thank you, Jerry.
These responses are great. I see one that says, I'm hopeful, but I'm afraid my students are feeling stranded. And to me, I see the value in doing this type of activity by switching perspectives between yourself and others, or between now and the future. That's kind of the point, isn't to just do this once and find out where you stand, but it's to kind of shift things. When I've done this, sometimes I'll say, okay, this is where you stand. What about 100 years in the future? And people will move around the room, and it's the reflecting on why you're moving or what you're feeling about the difference that really gives some meaning.
And part of this activity for me, and why Joel and I were processing this, was because we want to see how you're feeling and have you react to one another. This is a participatory community. That means we're in this network together. So I want to highlight one that I'm reading. I'm going to highlight Sarah's. I believe that all the things that I have no control over should not make me lose my joy for teaching. I do believe that I can influence my sphere around me, so I was higher. Okay. There's no right answer with this. This is your personal feelings, which is incredibly powerful. Cindy, I love the word changed teaching. I just like that thought, because teaching has changed. Okay, give another, oops, sorry about that. Did not mean to go back.
It's also worth noting that in the where educators stand today, we had two responses in the lower left quadrant of pessimistic about both. When it went to students, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 10 in that quadrant. So that's an interesting thing to reflect on about where we stand with educators as educators and what we might be able to do about that.
So let's take a pause there, and we're going to shift our thinking now. So we've thought about today, and I love everything you put in the chat. I want you to make sure you take some time and read these. I will be saving this chat, just so you know, if anybody wants it later, because there's some amazing ideas here. But we're going to continue. And as we move forward, keep thinking about this reflection, because you're going to come back to it. And let's do the next piece. We're going to do it again. Where educators stand in the future. So instead of thinking about right now, which is what we did previously, think about the future. Maybe it's a month away. Maybe you're talking 3 years. The future as educators, how are you feeling moving forward from today into the future? So this is where we get to our futures thinking. Same link. I don't like having too many links, so keep going to the same. So as educators, where do you stand in the future?
Pretty optimistic bunch. But noticeably not as many extremes in different parts of the lower right quadrant or lower left quadrant as we did when we were standing now. So people have maybe even a slight bit nudge of more optimism about both the structures and the influence.
Give about another 20 seconds.
Okay.
I put the link back in the chat for anybody that had to come back in. Okay, Joel, do you want to take a quick snapshot?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Got it.
locked it. Thank you. Okay, and you guessed it, one more. You probably know what it is. Your students. Where will your students stand in the future? And you could think both about your students you have currently in your district, or you can think about students you may have in the future. So 5 years down the road, same grade level. Where will they stand? Interesting.
Well, this shows me that in the future, students will be fleeing the quadrant that had pessimism on both sides and rushing into the quadrant that had essence and influence optimism. Going back and forth between the screenshots, it almost makes it look like they all, and they also clump together even more together too, which is interesting.
Okay, so I'm gonna have you take a screenshot, Joel, and let's get them to reflection and breakout so they can start talking.
Got it.
Thank you. So what we're going to do is we're now going to work with you to go into breakouts. So Joel, do you want to introduce this, and I'll get the link ready for them to have the slide decks.
Yeah. And, okay, great. So in this breakout room, you're going to use the question prompts and help spark some discussion. Really, this is the point where we want you talking to each other, and it shouldn't be too hard. We don't want you to overthink answering. We'd like if you have to just go around and get to know each other for a quick second. But the point here is to go around one time if you can, answering the starting prompt, which is just simply, I found this interesting, or I found something interesting because of this. Just about by going through the activity or what you saw. Then you'll go around again, and there's a category of reasoning questions, and then a third category of thematic questions. The goal would be that everyone can go through and offer a short answer to each one, but we're not evaluating or assessing anyone on that. The goal really is to breed a sense of community and to come back to the main group to be able to share some interesting tidbits that came about from challenging yourself to answer those questions after going through this activity.
And to give you an idea of the questions that you're going to be asked, these are the prompts that were written out for you. So notice they're broken into the 3 different rounds. So starting prompts, reasoning questions, thematic questions. So these are what you can reply to. I have pasted the link to these specifically in the chat, so you have access to them in your breakout room. That way, when we send you, you can always see what we're talking about. Sharing screen is going to be enabled, which means that if you want somebody to have these questions on the screen as you're talking, that's great. One of the things we've all discovered with students is you have to have very specific instructions. So having sentence stems or prompts like this tends to help them talk in breakout rooms. So while you're in the rooms, we would like you to continue to chat with one another. How long are we opening these rooms for, Joel, to have them talk about this? What's our timing looking like? I think we have at least 12 minutes. We have you in breakout rooms of 3 to 4 people, which should give you enough time to go through the rounds. So if you take about a minute per prompt, per person. Okay. And any questions before I send you? Okay. And with that, we will see you in roughly 12 minutes. There'll be a 15-second timer to come back, and then we'll see you. So make sure somebody has the link, should be in the chat. And if you need me, push help and I will be right there. Okay, bye everybody. As we're rejoining.
Andrew, we'll admit that our group really didn't, we kind of veered off task in a way, but it was very beneficial for us and more
okay with it.
rewarding.
I am fully aware of that happens and very supportive. The whole point of this community is so that we can talk with one another. And so that's always helpful. And
Yours are out at 5:30 or 5:35.
5:35. And Joel, my slide deck froze. Would you mind, do you have it open by chance? Would you mind presenting?
Sure.
It is not opening on my end.
Why can't I get the window? There it is.
Oh, it opened.
Oh, sorry. I was just pressing present. Go for it. So are you doing the debrief, right?
Yep. So now we're going to do the breakout room debrief. So just a quick conversation. We just encourage you to unmute. We had 5 breakout rooms. If we want to just spend 30 seconds just saying something we talked about, what is something that futures thinking may help you with? And if any room wants to just unmute and talk. If you don't feel like unmuting, you can feel free to write a 1 sentence in the chat as well. But I do encourage you to unmute because it's always good to hear voices.
Well, in our breakout room, the one thing I came away from is the way, at least I'm feeling now as an educator and being in education for so long, that where I put myself in the quadrant dependent a lot upon the state, since the McCleary Act, things have been going downhill, in my opinion, and education is looked upon a whole lot different. But also the administrators, and especially the head one, how they are handling this determines how most of the teachers are handling it. And if you don't have someone who has faith in you and respects you, then you're just going to feel beaten up.
I love that you just tied it back to the relationship piece. So I'm going to project on that. Notice the use of the word again. I'm going to think about, so that's administrator to teacher. So then there's also superintendent to administrator. And then there's also teacher to student. There's teacher to parent, teacher to community, student to teacher. So depending on how the relationships go, really can determine our futures thinking. So that's pretty powerful. And thank you for that statement. Let's open it up. We have enough time for one more before we wrap this up. So anybody else want to unmute and just share their breakout room? Just one more.
Andrew, I'll go ahead and talk. This is Will. So in our group, we were talking about where we currently are, and we're building a relationship. Actually, I knew Melanie. She and I have connected. We haven't seen each other for a really long time, so that was nice. But Maggie and Melanie and I were talking about the similarities that we're all going through as educators, bringing kids back and the hybrid and the discussions. And so just that part of the conversation created a sense of community. So thank you.
That's kind of the big point of this network. We want the opportunity. We have the power now to connect statewide. And I will tell you, we do have people that are going to be joining from other states too. So we have the power to make those connections and learn from each other. I don't know best practices all the time, but I know Jamie has some tricks that I've pulled from all the time. So we can learn from each other, and that's really powerful. So Joel, with our timing, I'm going to let you kind of close us out.
So the way that we're calling this a surf lesson is that we're going to finish up by connecting all that we've done today to the surf metaphor. So when you think of essence in terms of surfing, this is the wave. This is the natural event. This is happening whether you're out there trying to catch the wave or not. The wave is going to come in. The wave is going to be the size that the wave is. That's beyond our control. And then there's influence. There's the opportunity to use creativity and strength and balance and timing and all these things to ride the wave. So in the chat, real quick, if people could jump in and throw out some qualities that a good surfer would have, either qualities or what you would notice a surfer doing when they catch a wave. And there's no weight on this. You can throw it in the chat whenever you're ready.
Balance, athleticism, anticipation, core strength.
Oh, I like the core strength one.
Oh, not hesitating. I like that one. Feeling carefree, adjust or adjustment. Brave. Observation, balance, timing. Improvise.
Yes.
Getting back up, flexible, extremist, fluidity, balance. Okay, so let's bring them home, Joel.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for those.
So as educators, we can use these same qualities as surfers to prepare for and adapt to change. And so can our districts, our schools, and our people. We can work to become, in Peter Senge's words, learning communities. So let's review. A good surfer observes. She keeps her eyes open and looks for incoming waves. Extrapolates, estimates when the next set will arrive, how big those waves are going to be. Anticipates and strategizes the position. If the wave breaks right there, that's where I should be over here. Flexes and keeps dynamic balance to adapt to conditions. She keeps her knees bent, her stance open. Flexible was one of the words people shared. And she knows her own resources and uses them appropriately. She picks the right surfboard. She knows her ability. And this is what we're asking people to do. We're asking you to surf these waves of change that we're approaching. Next slide. So think to yourself as you're moving forward, how does the surfing metaphor relate to the mapping activity, where it indicates this motion and change? And what does it indicate about your role as you look to the future? And what will you do to prepare to surf the waves of change? And we'll finish this with a future studies professor of mine from the University of Hawaii at the Hawaii Research Center for Future Studies has this awesome quote. He says, "We can't ignore these waves of change. They won't go away. And they'll sweep us away if we don't try to ride them. They might even sweep us away if we do try. But I dare you to go for it. Come on, surf's up."
So I want to end this with a big thank you to you. Thank you for coming to this session, being a part of this. Your next step is to go to your regional Zoom meeting. So back on the thing, we can post these links in the chat if you know where you need to go as well. But I also want to show you one thing that we're trying to do with this is teach you how we did what we did. So if you want to do that mapping with your district, with your students, we're going to give you this slide deck. It will be in the Canvas course. This is a video tutorial of how to make your own Pull Everywhere, or use Google Maps, which works the same. So want to make sure you knew that that's there. But thank you for being here. It is now time to take a quick break and then meet with your region. And we appreciate you. Thank you for all your surfing you've already done this year.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you.
Good luck, Jerry. Happy retirement. Okay, Tracy, I'll put Puget Sound in the chat. Okay, Puget Sound is pasted. There you go. If anybody else wants a different one, I can paste it. It's also on the website. North Washington. Okay, let's see. 189. 189 is pasted. There you go. There's 189. 112. If you're with me at 113, it's just this room, so you can just stay.
123.
Okay, so let's see. 123. Okay,
112.
112 is pasted. Look for the one with the 05 at the end.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I think I need to go to ESD 113, but I thought I clicked it.
That's me.
So.
It's right here.
Oh, okay. Phew. I was like, wait a minute. Why am I trying to get to a new place?